This is Jonathan, and welcome to another episode of Repair Talk. Today, we are working on changing the charge port on a Dell 5000 series. This is not a quick job. This does take some time. So, to start out, we're going to go ahead and pull the two screws out of the bottom plates. Now, I use a metal Isesimo tool. This tool is extremely flexible, but can still cause damage. Got to be careful with it. I do recommend for first-time repairs or first-time technicians to use a plastic tool. That way you don't damage the plastic housing. Doing this for a long time, so I don't have to truly worry about that. Now, keeping up with your screws is a very, very important task when doing this. That way, when you put it together, you don't end up with 3-4 extra screws and like, oh, I apparently made the device better. I made it use less screws. No. So we're going to go ahead and remove all these screws. There are 3 under the battery and 3 under the DVD drive. To remove the DVD drive, you got to take those 2 screws out that are holding it in place and actually pop it out through the little battery slots. Then you'll be able to pull those 3 screws out. Once you've got all this removed, you'll be able to flip it over and get up under the keyboard and start to remove those screws as well. You also want to remove the RAM and the wireless interface card. They will potentially get damaged if left in. So once you remove that and the hard drive, then actually we can flip this over and start to work under the keyboard. Because most computers are going to actually label each screw hole with the actual size of the screw, I use Post-it notes and actually put the size of the screw on that Post-it note and put all those screws on top of it to keep them organized. That way they're an easy grab and drop back in when we're done. There are other ways to do this, magnetic mats and other forms. Either way, just keeping up with your screws is beneficial. Now, when you actually remove that hard drive and set it to the side, you got to be careful where you set it. There are magnets inside of the drive that actually help move the laser and use it over the actual spindle discs in there. If you cause too much of a magnetic disturbance around that hard drive, you can offset that and you can cause the drive to get jammed. And once that happens, you start to lose data. It's not a fun thing to explain to a customer. Just put it somewhere where there's no magnets. Using a plastic tool to put in this little slot here and basically to gently push out, you should be able to take that DVD drive and just push it out of its slot. I believe this particular computer, somebody spilled something on it, so it was a little sticky, so it didn't come out very easily. With all screws removed out of the bottom, we'll be able to go ahead and flip this thing over, and I use my iSesamo tool. You might want to use a plastic tool here. This is extremely easy to damage just because these keyboards are meant to be polycarbonate composite that is just very weak. So using that, you'll be able to pop the 4 clips at the top and be able to kind of go around the edges. And once you got all the clips around the edges and the top actually pop loose, you'll be able to lift that keyboard. You don't want to just remove it because it is still plugged into the motherboard. Once you actually lift the lever on the lock mechanism on the flex cable, you'll be able just to slide it on out, exposing the 6 screws and 3 other flex cables under the board or under the keyboard. Now once you've removed these screws, you need to remember to also unplug these 3 different flex cables. That way you don't stress them out or cause any damage to those. All 6 screws removed, 3 flex cables are unplugged, and keyboard is also removed. We're going to take the laptop. I usually set it like this to take all tension off of the hinges once this plastic bottom hatch is off, because without that extra tension on the hinges, it can cause the actual plastic screw retainers to actually break, and it's very common to see with these plastic Dells. I usually prefer a metal composite on my computers like my MSI, but you know, if you want to save money and get a nice computer, usually these plastic bodies is what you end up with. Now once every single screw is removed, as we've already done, we're just going to run my fingernail across this edge and you'll see it start to separate. There is a speaker flex that is still plugged in. You need to make sure that that is unplugged, otherwise you'll damage the wire to the speaker or the speaker itself, potentially even the actual connector on the board, which is not fun to deal with. Now there are 3 clips right here at the battery that as you lift up, you can use basically a pair of tweezers to kind of jimmy it up. That way it'll slide out of the slot and you'll be able to remove it without breaking any clips. This can take some time. Usually 10-15 minutes is not unheard of. You know, if you can't do it as fast as I can, it is okay. I do this all the time, so it's very easy for me. Once that's removed, we'll be able to go ahead and pull the screw out of this little daughter board on the side here. That way we can actually unplug the flex cable there that is attached to the motherboard. If you don't, you could potentially just tear that, just lifting the motherboard out to get to that charge port. Once we got that unplugged, I'm just going to set it to the side, and now this screw I'm not going to put with the rest of the screws because I know it specifically goes to this one. Then there's a screw right here on the motherboard, which you'll see in this picture, and then also the flex cable I'm pointing at is the LCD flex cable. You just want to unplug that because we are going to have to lift up this board. And because the flex cable is actually tucked under this hinge, we're going to go ahead and pull these 2 screws out. We also want to loosen the other side just to make sure that we're not putting stress on the actual plastic housing. Once these 2 are removed and the other 2 are loosened, you should be able to gently lift up on that and remove the LCD flex cable from that little crevice, and giving you the ability to go ahead and lift that motherboard and get that charge port removed and unplugged. Now there are hundreds of filters, capacitors, resistors, drivers, lots of little things on this board that you gotta be careful. You wanna make sure you grip it in a spot that doesn't have anything like that and just gently lift it out. It is kind of slotted into the side right here where these ports actually go into the plastic housing. You just wanna kind of lift up on the side that I'm lifting up on and be able to kind of just reach under there and unplug that charge port. Now you'll have to actually pull the board out to plug the new one in, so leaving it in doesn't help or hinder this, so it's totally your choice. Now this particular customer had actually dropped the laptop while it was charging, and it destroyed the actual mount that held it in place. So as you saw, I just had to remove the screw after removing the charge port. On the new charge port, it still has this mount, so we're going to go ahead and drop that screw in to hold it in place and get it plugged into the board. There is damage to its actual plastic housing. There's not really much we can do there. I was able to take a Dremel tool to kind of smooth it out, but other than that, replacing it is truly the only other option. They're not cheap because these are so specific to the motherboard and other components on it. These are anywhere between $100 to $150 just for that piece of plastic. It's kind of crappy, honestly. But once we got that board out, we're gonna go ahead and plug that charge port into it, and we're gonna go ahead and put that board back in. There is a perfect little crevice that this cable needs to go into, and as you see, that little gray block has an adhesive pad on it. You want to make sure that you stick that to the actual plastic housing to hold it in place. That way you don't have any kind of rocking on the inside. Now once that's said and done, you'll be able to go ahead and tuck it up under the hinge, get the LCD flex cable plugged back in, and also tuck it under the hinge. Be very, very observational when it comes to this part. Make sure that it is in the actual crevice. You don't want to put that back plate back down on it and press it in and actually pinch one of these cables, because then you have to take it further apart and actually replace more cables. It's just more of a headache. Just pay attention to this and you'll avoid that headache. Now I'm going to go ahead and drop this screw in to hold the charge port in place. Make sure those flex cables are where they're supposed to be. Get that LCD plugged in. Go ahead and drop the screw to hold in the motherboard and the two to drop in the hinge. And then we're also going to go ahead and replace that daughter board at that top right corner. Drop that screw in, and once that's done, we'll be able to go ahead and put the plastic frame back down and start to put this bad boy back together. Now, I do recommend actually recording yourself while you do this repair. That way, if for some reason at the end you do end up with an extra screw, you can understand exactly where you pulled it from and where you need to put it back. And just reminding, there are 3 flex cables and 6 screws here, not including the flex cable for the keyboard. So that would make 4. So let's plug these 3 in, get those 6 screws drop back down, and go ahead and plug up that keyboard as well. It is definitely an easier process to put the keyboard back down. As you see, just run your finger around the edges and it snaps back into its grooves. Alright, now once flipped over, There is still a battery plugged into this board, so we want to drop every screw that we can before actually putting in the components. That way we're not putting a lot of shock or any over voltage to anything and causing any damage. Unplugging that battery can reset the BIOS, which can cause a lot of issues, so we really just don't want to mess with that. So we're going to pop all these screws in. Once that's done, we'll be able to go ahead and pop the RAM, the hard drive, and all that back in. And as always, you want to test what your work has accomplished, see if it is good or bad. And voila, a charging computer. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to comment. Otherwise, remember to subscribe. There'll be more videos in the future. If you have any requests, definitely put some comments down there. Let me know what you want me to work on. We'll try to make it happen. Otherwise, see y'all next time.